Welcome to the suburbs of the 1950s, a serene environment of prosperity and conformity.
The baby boom and the suburban boom went hand in hand. Almost as soon as World War II ended, Levittowns in New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania would become the most famous symbols of suburban life in the 1950s, as people began to buy land on the outskirts of cities and use mass production techniques to build modest, inexpensive tract houses there. The GI Bill subsidized low-cost mortgages for returning soldiers, which meant that it was often cheaper to buy one of these suburban houses than it was to rent an apartment in the city.
These houses were perfect for young families. They had many developments like family rooms, open floor plans, and backyards that were not available in the city. By 1960, suburban baby boomers and their parents made up one-third of the population of the United States.
This change was evident in the average age that American women were married and the percentage of women who were giving birth. In 1940, the average American woman got married when she was almost 22 years old. In 1956, the average American woman got married when she was only 20. And just 8% of married women in the 1940s opted not to have children, compared to 15% in the 1930s.
The idea that a woman's most important job was to bear and nurture children was hardly a new one, but it took on a new significance in the post-war era. First, women were urged to leave the workforce and resume their place in the home. Second, it placed the baby boomers squarely at the center of the suburban universe. Thirdly, it generated a great deal of dissatisfaction among women who yearned for a more fulfilling life. This dissatisfaction, in turn, contributed to a rebirth of the feminist movement in the 1960s.
This was the age of respectability and conformity. The man was considered the head of the household in all things: mortgages, legal documents, and bank accounts. Only the family allowance was paid directly to the mother. Should a woman find herself in a loveless or violent marriage, she was trapped. She had no money of her own and no career.
In the 1950s, it was still unusual for women to go to universities, especially working class women. Most left school and went straight into work until they married. Secondary schools, schools like grammar schools, even prepared girls for this lifestyle. Lessons were given in cookery, household management, darning, sewing, and even how to iron a shirt properly. In these schools, girls were trained to look after their husband, their children, and their house for the future.
The rise of suburbia contributed directly to the so-called "white flight" of white Americans to the outskirts of cities. The suburbs were ideal places to raise children for these families. Men were able to go into the city and work and earn their money and return home to a more spacious life than was offered in the city. Males were often the breadwinners during this time. Because women were usually forced to do all of the jobs around the home, men often had more time for leisure and relaxation. The suburbs became a real community of people, where neighbors would interact with each other on a daily basis. They were friends. Women were generally supposed to make their husbands feel comfortable after a busy day at work. Men at home were carefree and centers of the entertaining side of family life.
Invigorated by victory overseas and a rebounding economy, the U.S. experiences an historic surge of births. 92% of all women who can have babies do, averaging just under 4 children each. 10,000 babies are born every day. 4 million babies are born every year. 76 million babies are born over 2 decades. Dwarfing the generations before them, the baby boomers are the new lifeblood of America. Industries are challenged to meet their overwhelming needs. Diapers for 76 million babies, bicycles for 76 million children, cars for 76 million adults, homes for 76 million newlyweds. The baby boomers begin having their own children, Generation X, numbering more than 82 million.
There were many positive effects as well as some negative effects of the baby boom. In order to keep up with all of the needs of the children that were a part of the baby boom, more products had to be produced than ever before. Food, clothing, diaper, and toy sales went up dramatically, helping the economy to flourish. So effectively, the baby boom increased the population and thus created a booming economy. Even though there were so many positives, some people were still worried about the negative effects of the baby boom. Every one of those children that had been born needed to go to school. More children meant teacher and classroom shortages and the crowding of schools as well. 10 million students entered the elementary school in the 1950s alone. People were also worried about food and whether or not farmers would be able to keep up with all of the hungry mouths needed to feed the country. This younger generation was increasing while the older generation was decreasing, a trend that would reverse as the baby boomers reached adulthood and beyond.
It seems as though the generations have kept on growing and growing. The baby boomers were born and the nation went through shock over how much was consumed. Then they began to have children of their own, and the population kept on growing. The baby boom began to alert people about how big the country was getting. One moment, the country is struggling with the Great Depression, and people are ending their lives and picturing a grim future ahead of them. The next moment, World War II brings the U.S. out of the Depression, and by the time World War II is finally over, more lives are being produced, and the future is starting to look bright again.
Today, the oldest baby boomers are already in their 60s. By 2030, about 1 in 5 Americans will be older than 65. And some experts believe that the aging of the population will place a strain on social welfare systems.
Boomin'